learners to be able to ask questions. And the next week, he came into the classroom and he said, I'm going to reserve the last 10 minutes of our teaching time for you to ask questions. And he came to that place and he said, are there any questions? And 85 hands went up in the air, literally. And they wanted to go all the way back to Acts 1 for questions that they couldn't ask 4.5 years ago. And from that time on, he reserved the last 10 minutes. But what was very funny is the next time he began a class, okay, he put in the church bulletin a note saying that this is a lecture class. We will not do any of those creative teaching methods in this class. What was he saying? He was saying there's not going to be any discussion. There won't be any dramatic presentation, anything of that nature. And what he was saying is the class revolves around him as the teacher. Now, a funny thing, our pastor was also analytic. And he said one time to the congregation, if I could slip through the back door, preach my sermon, and slip out the back door, I would enjoy being a pastor of a church. And I said, that's not a pastor, that's a teacher. You should be in a university someplace or in a seminary teaching. And he would say to people when he was going to be gone, if you are filling in for me, other staff members at the church, and he would say, if you're filling in for me, I do not want you to come into the sanctuary prior to the time that you're going to come up to preach, because the people will distract you if you come in early. That's very analytic. That's very much like an analytic learner saying that kind of thing. Now, if you are analytic and you are the student, you're going to love it when they give you lots of information. You're going to take a lot of notes. You're probably going to go home and review those notes. But the analytic learner says, I enjoy programmed instruction. So they're going to like computer education. They like lectures. They like stories. They like drills and competition. Why do they like competition? Because analytics are typically very competitive people. They like to do everything right academically when they learn. And there's an interesting thing about analytics being competitive. They also enjoy earning a lot of money. They like money. They enjoy learning, but they enjoy being in a job where they can earn a lot of money based on their abilities. Okay? Now, this means that when they come into our classroom, you'll notice that you don't see things in here that say break up into small groups and talk about the lesson or talk about the scripture. Now, they will do that for us if we have met their needs in another way. And the analytics says, when you come to the Bible time, do a good job teaching the Bible. Give me a good Bible lesson, and I will do the other things that I do not normally enjoy doing. Okay? Now, look at the things they don't like. They don't like all of the things that we talked about last night that the innovatives do like. So now we have a problem. If we have innovatives in our classroom and we have analytics in our classroom, what do we do? If we will meet the analytics need one time during the lesson, they will be willing to sit in and do these other things. Now, the analytic, remember, we said was a non-people person. What does that mean? That means they would prefer to work rather than in a group. They would prefer to work alone. So you can see that if I'm analytic and I'm in the classroom and my teacher, let's say, is innovative, and every day in the classroom, the teacher has us break up in small groups, read something, and talk about it. And the analytic is saying, you're driving me crazy because I don't enjoy that. How about you prepare some good information and you give me that good information and I'll take notes. Does that make sense about the analytic? So they're non-people people. They are abstract thinkers, meaning when you ask them a question, the brain turns on, they start processing everything, but it would be very rare that you would see the analytics saying, pick me, pick me, pick me in a classroom. They're not going to do that. They're going to sit there quietly until they are certain they have the right information, enough information to give you the, say it loudly, the right answer. They rarely would raise their hand and just give an answer. Okay? Like many other children, last night we said that for them, the answer to every question is Jesus, right? Every question we ask, the answer is Jesus. The analytic would rarely ever do something like that. They would think, they would process it, and then they would gather the information and give you an answer. Now, will they do these other things? Yes, they will do these other things. But you can see in their face that they're not really enjoying it. They're just doing it. Does this make sense? Because they're non-people people. And that's why if you give them workbooks, you give them things to do, they're going to excel in that. But guess what they do not like? They do not like it, especially in Sunday school, when we give them something to do just to fill the time. They don't like that. So they want everything we do to have a purpose. They want it to have a purpose in the classroom. And the analytics say, I'm going to work best when you tell me what is expected of me. Say, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we would like to do it. The analytic also says, I want to know that what I'm doing is realistic and practical. And the analytic will say, in a classroom, please don't call on me unless I raise my hand. Don't call on me unless I raise my hand. Because they don't like to be embarrassed. They don't like to be called on unless they have had enough time to gather enough information to give the right answer. Okay? So it's very rare that they would say, pick me, I know the answer. That's not like them. They would not do that. And the analytic says, I want to be recognized for my accomplishments. Now that seems kind of strange, doesn't it? But the analytic says, don't call my name and have me stand up and have everyone applaud for me. The analytic says, quietly come over to me and say, I appreciate what you said. I appreciate your contribution. It tells me you've really been thinking about this. Okay? Can you see how different they are from the innovatives we talked about last night? Completely different in their learning style and their personalities than the innovatives. Non-people people. They want to think before they act. They prefer to work alone rather than in a group. They want the teacher to be well prepared. They do not respect the teacher who comes in the classroom and says, oh my goodness, let's see, where are we today? I didn't have much time to prepare, so let me figure this out. And while class has started, the teacher is running around and trying to gather their thoughts. And the analytic is saying, this is going to be a waste of my... Yeah, because this person is not prepared. Now, last night we talked about if I'm a teacher and I'm putting things out, and an innovative comes to the room, we go over, we greet them, we may touch them, we may shake their hand. Some of you may even give them a hug. Right? But the analytic walks through the door, and I'm putting things out, and I turn to the analytic, and I say, good morning, it's nice to see you. And I go turn back around, and the analytic goes, whew. They didn't come over to give me a hug. Sure. And then the analytic will usually choose a place closer to the front because they find people a distraction. Isn't that strange? The reason we're here, and the analytic finds people a distraction. So the analytic will typically come closer to you. they will ask some interesting questions. Like one time we were doing the book of Acts, and an analytic raised his hand, and I said, yes, what is your question? He said, what was going on in China when Paul was on his second missionary journey? And I said, I didn't even know China existed then. I have no idea. So what was happening is, this child was sitting in the classroom, and while I was talking about, Asia Minor over here, he's wondering, what's going on way around here in the world? And so he asked the question. Now, when an analytic comes into the classroom for us, okay, they would enjoy it if we said, by the way, our lesson today is going to be on such and such. And if you want, you can turn in your Bible to 1 John 1, if that's where the lesson is going to be. And the analytic would typically sit down and turn to 1 John 1. It would be very common for them to sit down and begin reading ahead of you or ahead of the class. There are two reasons they do that. Because they want to know, but secondly, this is very interesting, doing that allows them to not have to interact with other people. It would allow them to not have to interact with other people. They're not doing that to be rude. They're not doing that to be disrespectful. That's just the way their brain works. Okay, does that make sense to you? So now we have two kinds of learners we've talked about that will come into a classroom. And now we know the kinds of things we would do to meet each of their needs. Yes, sir.
In average class, what is the percentage of those analytical learners?
Very good question. Yes. In an average class, there will be about 25% analytics, about 25% innovatives, maybe 30% analytic and innovative, depending on the teacher. Okay? And they're pretty well evenly distributed. Last night we talked about the fact that the innovatives, that 60% of the innovatives are women. 60% of women are innovatives, or 60% of the innovatives are women, and about 40% of innovatives are men. For men and women in analytic, it's about 50-50. About half women, half men. Now, if my Sunday school class meets the need of the analytic, then the analytics are going to keep coming. But I can tell you, if you walk into a Sunday school class and as soon as you walk in there, the teacher starts a game, and then they move from a game to something else like a small group or something of that nature, the analytic is going to be very uncomfortable. The analytic is going to say, when are we actually going to get to the lesson and learn something? Because the analytic is saying, I don't learn that way. Why? Because the games, the interactions, the small groups, they see as distractions as opposed to learning opportunities. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Something else. Okay, we all have a dominant learning style, and the dominant stays with us our whole life. But if you have been breathing very long, your environment that you live in, the expectations of you are going to shape your learning style. You're going to learn new skills, and you're going to have to use those new skills to survive, or you will use those new skills to accomplish things. For instance, if I was analytic, okay, let's say that I was analytic and I was, let's make this easy, I was a school teacher, okay? I would be forced to develop some people skills to get along with my students, you see. Now, I have a very good friend that was the strongest analytic I've ever met. He used to wear a ring that was a skull and crossbones. Why did he wear a ring that was a skull and crossbones? To remind him of how short life is, and you have to be busy, busy, busy all the time. Yet, he taught a Sunday school class, and he learned that when the people came into the class, he had to be willing to stand up and at least shake hands with them, okay, and say, good morning, it's good to see you. But what did he do for a living? He was a computer programmer. And he worked by himself. That's what he did. Remember I said that analytics also like money? Okay. This same guy, he worked for IBM, and he and a friend decided that they were going to start their own computer programming company many years ago. They were going to wait 1 year to do this. And the analytic did something very contrary to the personality. The next day when he went into work, he resigned. He quit his job, okay? And the friend he was going to start the business with loaned him $10,000 to get started. In those days, that was a lot of money. It was in the early 70s. That was a lot of money. And so the analytic started the computer programming company. Do you think he was successful? Very successful man. He actually sold the business to a company in Minneapolis. Later, he sold the company for $350 million. Now, it was about 8 years to 10 years later, and he had borrowed $10,000 from an innovative. Now, would the innovative ever approach him and confront him and say, where's my money? The innovative would never do that. So they were both named Bill. So the analytic Bill went over to the innovative Bill's home, knocked on his door, and the innovative says, come in, come in, come in. And the analytic Bill would have preferred to stay outside, but he went in and they sat down, very short time of small talk. And the analytic Bill went like this. He says, I know you think I forgot the $10,000 I loaned you. He says, but I didn't forget, and I want to repay you now. And the innovative Bill says, oh, it doesn't matter. That's okay. And the analytic Bill, very loyal, steady eddies, he pulls out an envelope and he gives it to the innovative Bill. Okay? And the innovative Bill takes and just throws it on the table in the house. Doesn't open it. Because he wanted to talk, because that's what innovators do. So Bill went home, Bill stayed at home, and a couple of days later, the innovative Bill says, I guess I should take the check to the bank. So he picked up the check, he took the envelope, and he went down to the bank, and he opened the envelope, and the check in the envelope was made out for, you want to guess? $1 million. $1 million. No thank you note or anything inside. The $1 million was thank you enough. See? That's how analytics think, and that's how they work. They're very loyal. In the classroom, they expect us to be prepared. They expect us to be able to answer the questions when they have questions. Okay? But they don't want us to be, touchy and like if they're working on something, may I? The last thing they would want if you were working on something, when they came over to you, the last thing they wanted is, well, let me see how you're doing here today. And rub the back and say, get your hands off of me. Oh, you're creeping me out. That's what they would think. Sure. I never saw this guy, Bill. I never saw the analytic Bill. I never saw him one time give anyone a hug. Never in my whole life. The other Bill, innovative Bill, if you're within 5 feet, you're going to get this. You're going to come over and give me a hug. I had not seen either of them for many, 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 many years. And I went to the funeral of a very close mutual friend, okay? And so you walk in the room, and there's Analytic Bill, and Analytic Bill is having a very quiet conversation with one person. Innovative Bill, he's going around, he's slapping everybody on the back, he's having a good time, he's, saying it's so good to see you, haven't seen you in years, and you walk over to him, he's a great big guy, and you get this big bear hug, and then you go over to see the Innovative Bill, and the Analytic Bill, and you don't interrupt, you wait until he looks at you and acknowledges you, and then you shake hands and say, Good to see you, Bill. How have you been? Fine. That's it? Haven't seen you in 25 years. I'm fine. How are you? And when he says, how are you? Do you think he wants a long, no. He wants you to say, I'm fine also. Because that's just the way God made them. But they really enjoy it as when you're a teacher and you do a really solid Bible teaching for them. That's what they like. Now, can they learn skills? Of course they can. I have a friend that is analytic, that is a pharmacist. But he has learned people skills. And people like being around him. He's learned skills. All right, let's move on quickly here. Common sensors. Common sensors are non-people like the analytics. But the difference between the analytic and the common sensor is the analytic does what? They think before they act or speak. The common sensor is an active learner, so what do? They act before they think, right? And we said they get into a lot of trouble, and they put their foot in their mouth a lot. Okay? Okay? So now, the common sensor very often acts like they have no common sense. The common sensor is very realistic. They're very practical. They think in logical sequences, and life has logical consequences. Now, there's a saying that says, if you did the crime, you're going to do the time. And that's what the common sensor thinks like. You did it. You did something wrong. You're going to pay the consequences. Now, there's an interesting thing about common sensors. By the way, they're very goal-oriented. They would also like to earn a lot of money. But unlike the analytic, they don't save. The common sensor spins. Why? Because to them, I can spend it all today because I know I can make more money tomorrow. Okay? Now, the common sensor is identified by two words called justice and hands. And last night we said that justice means they have a very long list of rules. Now let's think about that for a moment. They have a long list of rules, and the rules apply to everybody in the world except them. Yes. They're the rule keepers, and the rules apply to them, to everyone except them. Okay? And they like to do things with their hands. So let's move on and see what they learn by asking, is it valid? Now, here's what's happening in a classroom. As we're teaching them, especially when we're doing Bible teaching, the common sensor is sitting there and thinking to themselves, okay, can I use this stuff as soon as I walk out the door? Is this valid? Is this realistic? Is this usable? If it's not practical and usable, the common sensor says, why do I waste my time learning it? And this is the kid that comes home from school and says to their parents, why do I have to learn this math? I will never use it. Why do I have to learn all this history? I will never use it. So because they are so practical, they think in very short-term segments. And if I can't use it right now, why should I bother learning it? So now can you see how different that student is from the analytic or the innovative? So this kid could actually create a lot of trouble and conflict in the classroom because the analytic says, I love problem solving. Remember last night we talked about the innovative, that they don't like problems, they don't like debates, etc. The common sensor says, I like problem solving so much that if there isn't a problem, I'll create a problem for you. And we can see this very, very young. I remember teaching 4-year-olds one time when we were sitting in circle time, and the 4-year-old common sensor is sitting there, and he's thinking to himself, I wonder what it would be like to take off my cowboy boot and hit the girl next to me in the side of the head. And so he took off his cowboy boot, and bam, he hit her in the side of the head. And then like a dummy, I said, why did you do that? And he looks at me like, why not? I wanted to see what it felt like. Now, I have a common sensor. His name is Gabriel. Gabriel is 10 years old. Gabriel is a common sensor. He also has ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and he has oppositional defiant disorder. And a lot of kids who are common sensors, though, are diagnosed with ADHD or attention deficit disorder when they are really bored out of their mind. But he has those. He is like a classic case, okay? And he's always saying, how does it work? What happens if I do this or that? So he had one of these little battery-operated cars, a Jeep. And in our house, in our garage, we have a water pipe that comes in because we're on well system. We have a big water pipe that comes in. And he wanted to find out what would happen if he ran his Jeep into the water pipe. Guess what he discovered? It breaks it. And until someone figures out where the switch to the pump is, it's flooding the garage. So when I got home, I said, Gabe, come here. Came over. I said, I think I know the answer, but why did you run your Jeep into the water pipe? Because I wanted to see what would happen. And that's the way they live their lives. Okay? Now, they like debates. Remember we said the innovative doesn't like debates? The common sensor says, I love debates because a debate could turn into a really good argument. They like arguing. Arguing is a game for them. It's like fun for them. Okay? They like independent study, meaning they like to work alone. They like experiments. Now, the reason they like workbooks and Bible games on the bottom, why do you think they like those things? Because it presents a challenge to them. Not only does it present a challenge to see if I can do it, it presents a challenge to see if I can do it and finish first and make everyone else in the class look bad. Now, the favorite word for the common sensor is, well, let's do this, you fill in the blank. The common sensor is driving down the street, okay? And someone pulls in front of him and he has to slam on his brakes. And he said, did you see how that blank is driving? Say it. Say it. Louder. Idiot is their favorite word. Because to them, the whole world is a bunch of except them. Yes. Yes, exactly. And they use that word just all the time about people. And it doesn't bother them. They might be in a Sunday school class and someone does something they don't like and they will call them an idiot. Yes. Now, I was at an Indian church a couple of years ago. Everyone from the church was from India. And when they drove up, okay, the first person to arrive was the hostess and her husband. And they drove up, and it had just snowed, and so the streets were kind of sloppy. But they drove up in the shiniest black BMW I've ever seen on a day when every other car was covered with mud. And I said, he's a common sensor. And how did I know he was a common sensor? Because common sensors, when they become adults, they like to show I am successful by what? The kind of car they drive and the clothes they wear. Now they got out of the car, and as we talked, I realized that the wife, the hostess, was innovative. Now if you look at your first page, they are diametrically the opposite. And they came into the meeting, and in their churches, the women all sit on one side, and the men sit on another side in the church. So they had the tables lined up, and he was sitting across from his wife. And I made the mistake of saying, what does a common sensor think of an innovative? And guess what he said out loud publicly to everyone? He looked right at his wife and said, she's an idiot. Now, she didn't go, "You've hurt my feelings." Why? Because she had heard it so many times that she was totally insensitive to him. Okay? Now, can you see how these kids can be tough kids to have in your classroom? Now look at the top. They're problem solvers. Last week, came in my classroom, and a common sense child, I know this child is common sense, came through the door. And when they came through the door, I turned around and I said, "Where have you been? Come on, get over here. I need you to put these papers out and get the boxes out. And can you sharpen the pencils?" And the common senser comes to life because they're solving a problem for you. And they're thinking, "See, I knew this." You know what the common sense is thinking? "I knew the idiot couldn't teach the class without me and needs my help." That's what they're thinking. Yes, that's what they're thinking. Because I've talked to enough common sensors to know that they will tell you, yes, idiot is my favorite word in the whole world. Because the rest of the world is that except me. Okay? Now, as we look here, look at the things they don't like. They don't like memorizing. They don't like reading. They don't like writing, group work. Why don't they like those things? Because they don't see a point or reason in doing it. Because I won't use it right now. You see how different they are? Then these can be tough kids. This is the first group of kids that will leave our church. These kids will leave the church before anyone else. Why? Because they are bored. They're bored. There's not enough action going on. And if they're in a classroom where they're told, "Sit still while you're in my classroom," the common sensor is going to find a way to get out of coming to church. They will either cause enough trouble at home or enough trouble at church that the parents say, "I'm not bringing him back," and he goes, "Yes!" Or she goes, "Aha, it works." Now, 60% of common sensors are men and 40% are women. Can you understand, if you're a common sense woman, the kind of trouble you could have in personal relationships? Sure. And I see it all the time. I see it all the time. Now, the common sensor comes into our classroom, and the common sensor says, "Create a problem." So give me something that is a challenge to think about that creates a problem that I'm going to solve. And they also say, "I don't want to have a strict accounting of my time." All right? And in the classroom, the common sensor will work with people if working with people will allow them to get their way. Okay? And the common sensor walks into a room thinking, "You know what? If you would just do it my way, it would get done faster and better." Because everybody knows that my way is always the right way, no matter what. There's some common sensors in this room, aren't there? Absolutely. Okay, now, the dynamic, the last group we're going to talk about today, we're doing well. The dynamic is curious, they're insightful, they're imaginative. And this student walks in our room, and they come through the door, and you turn to them and you say to the dynamic, "Hey, this is what we're going to do today. What do you think?" And the dynamic says, "Well, I think that's okay, but have you ever thought about it doing it this way?" Amanda was 4 years old. She was dynamic. And every Sunday in the 4-year-old classroom, when I would call the other students around to circle time, she would crawl under a table. She would crawl under the table. And I would spend half my time trying to get Amanda out from under the table. But she was under the table doing something that was always related to the lesson, which was very interesting. And as soon as I finished, Amanda would have all the other kids under the table, and she would be redoing the lesson in a different way than I did it. Why? Because the dynamic says don't do it the same way all the time. Mix it up. Try different things. Because remember what the dynamics motto is and how they learn? What can this become? And they're saying, well, if you would do it this way, this person would learn. If you would do it this way, these people would be learning over here. Does that make sense? And so the dynamic says, let me explore more possibilities. Okay? And if I'm a teacher and I'm dynamic, I'm going to be facilitating and stimulating my students to become all they can become. Now, I have a very good friend named Ray, and Ray is dynamic, and Ray and I worked on learning styles for 15 years together when we worked together. And Ray was always pushing people to become better. You could do this. You could read this, do this, and you could be really good at this because they're encouragers by nature. Okay? They are the Philemons of the Bible. They are the encouragers. They are the refreshers. And one time, he and his wife were driving someplace, and he refused to purchase a cell phone. And he said to his wife, Nancy, when you get to the next place on the freeway to pull off the road and go to a gas station that has a payphone. And she said, Ray, what do you want to go to a payphone for? Here's what he said. He always called me by my last name, Kreider. He never called me by my first name. It was always Kreider. He says, I want to call Kreider and tell him how much I love him. Isn't that interesting? Because that's typical of the dynamic. He said, and I want to tell him how proud I am of him that he has worked so hard in the job that we have together. What was he doing? He was going to stop and use the payphone to call me to encourage me. Sure. Now, my 9-year-old is a dynamic. She was walking out of school one day when they went to school, before we started homeschooling, and she saw the principal of the school. The principal earlier that day had given Gabriel, believe it or not, a spanking. Because of that school, they still spank. Had given him a spanking. And they're walking out, and the dynamic is in the front. She was very young, and she was leading the pack. There was Gabriel, her common sense brother, and Jonathan, her innovative brother. And she says, there's Mr. Randall. That's the principal. There's Mr. Randall. Let's go give him a hug. Because she's a people person. And her brother said no. And she says, why not? Mr. Randall loves us. And the common sense child who just got the spanking says, he certainly does not. And she said, fine. And she runs to give Mr. Randall a hug. Because they're people. If you could see her at church, if she knew you, and you had been a substitute in her class 2 years ago, if she walked in the room, even right now, she would smile at you, and she would immediately run over and wrap her arms around you. And just look up to you and smile. Because that's who she is. She gets up in the morning, and she comes to you, and she gives you a hug. And then she takes off looking for her boys, she calls them, her brothers, because they're natural-born leaders. Okay? Now, the dynamic says to us, I like case studies, I like small groups, I like when we have drama in the classroom, meaning let's act out the lesson. Just last week in my class, it was Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. Okay? Isaac was blind. Jacob was deceiving him. And I had one child play Isaac, and I put a blindfold on. And then I put a name tag on, one that said Jacob and one that said Esau. And I had the kids role play it. And all I did was I went over, and when Isaac had a line he was supposed to say, I whispered it in his ear, and he said it. And then same thing for the other kids. The whole classroom was like watching the whole time. And the kids that really like drama, I mean, they were like on the edge of their chairs watching this, and they wanted me to do it again and let them take part in it. But the dynamic often says, let's do that again so someone else could have a turn, because they would learn by doing that. Okay? The dynamic says to us also, I like role plays, originality, but the reason they like all of these things, notice what these things typically are. They involve groups of people. And the dynamic says, let's do it together as a group. They don't like seating charts, they don't like routines, they don't like assignments with options, they don't like to do things in haste. And they say, let me follow my curiosity, let me work in depth, let me be creative, but let me work with other people, because they're people. But they're natural born leaders. They're natural born leaders. Now, they like to be verbally affirmed, and so they would love it in the classroom if they do something really well. You go over and you say, Amanda, that was great. Everybody, didn't Amanda do a good job on this? And Amanda is just lighting up. Okay? Now, my 9-year-old, who's dynamic, she loves dressing up. She loves dressing up in costumes, and she had to do a presentation at her homeschool group last week. You wouldn't believe it. It was like a 15-minute presentation, and she asked my wife to make a special dress, and she told her what she wanted, and it was a very elaborate dress. She had fake pigtails, ponytail, or braids, and she went the whole route to do her presentation. Why? Because she likes drama. And when she's in a drama at our church, she's very expressive, but she's always going over to the other people after they said their part and saying, that was very good, you did it really, you spoke out and I could understand you, that was so good in what you did. So they're encouragers. Now, let's take a look here, let's move very quickly, and let's take a look back at this sheet of paper, because I think this will bring it together for us. So what is the purpose of understanding learning styles? Is it so I can say, I know who you are, I know who you are? No, not at all. The purpose of learning styles is that I say, wow, I have different kinds of learners in my classroom, and out of respect for those students, I will do different kinds of teaching methodologies in the classroom. Now, does it make sense? Because I know if I do something that involves a group of people, I'm going to reach the dynamics and the innovatives. If I do something that allows them to work alone, I'm going to reach the common sensors and the analytics. When I ask questions, I don't call on the innovatives and the analytics. They will raise their hand when they're ready to speak. But when I ask questions, the active learners are going to say, pick me, and they're going to give the answer very quickly, and they don't care if it's the right or wrong answer. If they think about it, they're going to give the answer. Now, here's what I want you to do, and I hope this will make sense to you. Somewhere up here on your paper, I want you to write the name Matthew. And then I want you to come down, and somewhere in this quadrant, write the name Mark. And then move over here and write Luke. And come up here and write John. Now watch this. What can this become? Matthew wrote a New Testament book that contains more prophecy and what it became, how it was fulfilled, than any other book in the New Testament. Mark went on that first missionary journey with Paul and Barnabas, and when they got to Antioch Pisidian, what did Mark do? He quit. He came home. He wrote the shortest gospel, and he records all the action miracles of Jesus. Dr. Luke, the analytic, You remember what he said? He said, I've taken many notes, and I now write this to you to give you an accurate account of the events. And what word leaps out of all of Apostle John's writing? Love. What does he say so many times in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John? He says, it does my heart good to know that my dear children are walking in the way. He is the only writer in the New Testament that recorded, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. So what are we learning there? We're learning that when God chose people through inspiration to write the scriptures, he used their personality, their learning style, their cultural background, their circumstances to communicate. And he didn't say, you have to become like someone else to do it. And that's what we have to do in the classroom. We cannot say to our students, you have to become like me if you want to be in my classroom. You have to learn the way I learn if you want to be in my classroom. So that means as we prepare, we must pick and choose our teaching methodologies so that we reach each learner once a week, and they will stay with us. Now, what does the common sense learner desperately need? The common sense learner to stay in the church, because they're the first people to leave the church, the common sense learner needs one-on-one. They need a mentor. They need one person that makes them feel like, I'm the center of the universe. And that's very important, because we lose common sensors all the time in the church because they don't see that it's practical, they don't see that it's useful, and we can keep them by developing that one-on-one relationship. Okay? Let me stop and see if you have any questions before we stop this, take a break, and then move into becoming a great teacher. Any questions about learning styles? Yes, sir. Ah, very interesting. We have learned skills to survive. The expectations of our jobs, the expectations at church, okay? We learn skills, but we possess a dominant learning style when it comes to learning how we would choose to learn. Now, what does that mean? That means that, okay, if I'm a non-people person and I prefer to work alone, I'm probably going to learn best working alone without the distractions. Does that mean that I don't work with people? Not necessarily. I may have to work with people. So I learn new skills, but I maintain my dominant learning style. Yes, I develop skills in other areas. Yes, sir. Culture plays a significant role in this, and I'll tell you why. Because culturally, we have very strong expectations, don't we, of people, whatever culture we're in. The culture has expectations. There may be a culture that says women don't speak. Only the men speak. There may be a culture that says, I would never raise my hand and be singled out to say something. When I talk when I'm teaching in Chinese churches, okay? The Chinese church has some very specific roles for children and adults, men and women. Okay? I was doing this one night in San Francisco for a group of Chinese churches. And a woman came up to me and she said, I'm 82 years old. And tonight was the first time in my life that I realized whom God made me to be. That's what she said. She said, I want to tell you, this was one of the best nights of my whole life. And as I talked to this woman, I said, you're 82 years old? She said, yes. I said, I have a question. Do you still work? She said, every day I go to work. I'm an accountant. And I said, why do you work every day? I said, do you need the money? And she started laughing and said, no. I said, why do you work every day? She said, because I can hear my dead husband's voice every morning say, get up, get up, get up, go to work, go to work, go to work. I said, what would you do if you could do anything in your life? And she said, well, first let me tell you, I discovered tonight I'm innovative. She said, if I could do anything in my life, I would have spent my life going to hospitals and visiting people and bringing kindness to them. And can you imagine that personality, that learning style, who's been an accountant her whole life? And she said, tonight, I know it's okay for me to be me. Isn't that interesting? So, any other questions? Good questions. Yes, sir.
For the analytical style, many of our Christian teaching is caring and love and emotion. How we can
Very good. Do you hear what he just said? Most of a Christian teaching is based on caring and loving, etc.
and those have boundaries.
And what about the analytic in that environment?
We need to just add this to their style, and they might love it too.
Yes. Now, if I was analytic, 84% of the time I would be married to a dynamic. I would be married to a dynamic. Do you know that at my church, that is one of the reasons that in all of our Sunday school classes, it's husband and wives? And I can see it. I can walk into a classroom and I can see whomever is taking charge and interacting with the children and doing a really good job with that. You can see in their face they love it. I know that that partner is either innovative or dynamic. And the other spouse is very content being in the background and getting things ready, doing things. And they don't need that constant contact. So what it means is I do have to force myself to learn skills. I cannot tell you how many hundreds of times I have read a suggested teaching method in the curriculum, and I've said to myself, I am not doing that. That is the silliest thing I've ever heard of. And my wife would say, why don't you try it and see how the kids like it? And I would do it, and half the kids in the class would absolutely love it. And my wife is looking at me like, see, I told you to try this. Because it was out of character for me. Does that make sense? So what I do when I see those things that I'm not comfortable doing, I say, I'm going to do it because it's going to stretch me and I'm going to reach some students I may not normally reach. All right. Now you want to have a little bit of fun. You get to guess my learning style. Now you say to yourself, okay, is he a people person or non-people person? If he's people person, he's up there. If he's a non-people person, he's down there. So you want to guess? Throw something out. You say common sense. Someone else. Analytical, someone else. Dynamic. Innovative. Tell me why you're saying dynamic or innovative. Did he say I'm a mess? Oh, a mess. Why would you have said I was innovative? You see something. Why did you say dynamic?
I would think you're an encourager, an active, more people person, and a more active than a reflective.
Why did you say you thought I was common sense? Because my wife's innovative. She thinks that because my wife's innovative that I must be common sense because I said 84% of the time. Okay?
I think you are highly skilled to see it.
Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you are looking at the ultimate non-people common sensor. And you say, why? You know why? Because our God is such a wonderful God. He says, I have something I want you to do, and I'm going to mold you, I'm going to bend you, and I'm going to shape you. I'm going to give you new skills. And he also says, when I have something I've called you to do, if you don't let me bend you, and if you don't let me mold you and shape you, I will I will break you.
This is great, but not everybody, as a Sunday school teacher, will be able to analyze different kind of style in the classroom.
Okay?
What's your tips for us?
Don't analyze them.
No. What you need so you can do your lesson as a mix.
Okay?
What's your expectation? We need tips to
Okay,
analyze
let's
different
do that.
style at the beginning of every year.
All right, very good. First thing you have to know is, who am I? What is my dominant learning style? Now, since I know that my dominant learning style is common sense, I also know something about myself. I know that my spiritual gift is service, and so I want to serve the Lord. Okay? And if I am put in a teaching position, then I say to myself, I will serve the Lord as a teacher. And what is it going to take for my students to learn and for me to be a good teacher? And then I said to myself, you're going to have to learn how to be friendly to people. You're going to have to learn how to do things not necessarily perfectly all the time, because common sensors tend to either be perfectionists or total slobs. Okay? And so I look at myself first and I say, if God's called me to go all over the United States and talk to strangers all the time, you have to be able to what? Greet them and have conversation with them and make them feel comfortable, right? So I don't necessarily look at my students and say, what is she, what is he? I assume that when they come in the classroom, they're going to be mixed. And therefore, I do something from each of the learning styles every week in my classroom, knowing that I'm going to reach each of those students. Now, there's an interesting thing about common sensors. Because they're very strong non-people, you would think they would not enjoy being with people. But common sensors have to be very careful, because they also have a negative characteristic as being manipulators. Remember I said they look at the world and say, why doesn't the world do everything my way? Because my way is always the right way. Okay? So if I'm a teacher and I walk in a classroom, as I did last Sunday and I will do tomorrow, a brand new group of kids that I've never worked with, I make an assumption. I assume that I have some innovative, some analytics, some common sensors, and some dynamics. Now, as I use different teaching methodologies, let's say that I'm using drama. And I notice that some kids are saying, let me do it, let me do it, let me do it. I'm going to say to myself, those are people, probably. And so now I know they're probably either innovative or dynamic. And now I will know that when I choose these kinds of teaching methodologies, these are the kids I'm going to reach first, and these are the kids I'll reach second. Do I worry about knowing what their learning style is? I don't. But once I do know their learning style, then I'm much more comfortable. Now remember what I said, that the innovative and the dynamic, when they walk through the door, because they're people, they like it when you go over and give them a hug. Giving people a hug is not normal and natural for the non-people learning style. Okay? And so I had to learn to do that. I had to force myself to do it. And now, what does God do? Isn't it interesting that I said that 84% of the time we marry the opposite learning style? Okay? So what did God teach me? How did God teach me to develop skills so that I could interact with people and be comfortable and they would be comfortable? Okay? First thing he did, he gave me an innovative wife. And I used to come home from conferences and I would talk with my wife, and here's what would happen. I would be at a conference, okay, and I might be standing in my booth where I was going to exhibit, and I would see someone coming down the aisle, and that person had met me 2 or 3 years ago and been in workshops, and they would see me and they go, and they're coming to me, they're going to give me a big, and you know what I used to do? I used to say to my friend Ray, I think I need to use the restroom. And I would go hide in the booth until this person came and went. And I would come home and I would tell my wife that story. And you know what she said to me? She said, the hugs are not for you. The hugs are for them. And then I have an innovative wife that said to me, you need to get over yourself because you aren't that great. And then you know what God really used? God used a little baby. And when this little baby was 6 weeks old, and he was placed on my chest, it was like the Lord spoke to me and said, I'm going to use this boy to change your life. And when that little boy was 18 months old, he was sitting right here on this knee. And I was reading to him, and he said, Grandpa, stop. And he put his hands on my face, and he turned my face toward him. And he said, I love you so much. And I said to that little boy, I love you too. And at 18 months of age, you know what he said to me? You're never going to love me as much as I'm going to love you. And God used that little boy to teach me unconditional love. He used that little boy to teach me that you don't set rules for loving people. That you don't say you have to come up to this standard before I'm going to love you. And God used that little boy because he wasn't perfect. And God used him to teach me, excuse me, to love people unconditionally. Does that make sense? All right, let's stop. Let's take a break. It is noon, right? Okay, we're going to take a break. What time do you want to eat?
1, as we said yesterday.
Let's eat at 1. So let's take a break now.
It's going to be like 10-minute break, quick break.
Yeah. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about you becoming great teachers. Okay? Very practical. So if we could switch to taking your ministry to the peak. Thank you.